Hello and welcome back to F1 Every Week. I am your host Ben Wevel, and today I'm going to be reviewing and analysing this weekend's Dutch Grand Prix, the 15th round of the 2022 Formula 1 World Championship. The infamous Zandvoort Circuit was first used in a Grand Prix all the way back in 1948. And was on the F1 calendar first in 1952. 1986 could have been the final Grand Prix at Zandvoort after the company that owned the circuit went out of business, but it returned last year thanks to the appeal for the sport in the Netherlands, created by last year's World Champion Max Verstappen, who was victorious at his home Grand Prix in 2021 as well. Zandvoort is a very, very unique circuit with a seaside setting and those infamous banked corners at turn 14 and turn 3, which create an intriguing challenge for the drivers. The FIA also decided to implement some fake gravel traps coming into this weekend, which act to both negate the speed of the cars who are considering violating track limits, which has been a very contentious issue all season long, and it also stops gravel being flung onto the track. The use of gravel traps in Belgium last weekend was very successful indeed, and this innovation is yet another positive development by the FIA. You can listen to the podcast on the streaming platform of your choice, including Apple Podcasts and Spotify. All linked below. Now, without further ado, let's get into episode 72. First off this week is the pre-race news, and on Friday the 2nd of September, it was finally announced that Oscar Piastri would be driving for McLaren next year. We all suspected that this would be the outcome, but the statement from the Contract Recognition Board revealed a rather unsavoury series of events leading up to Daniel Ricciardo's eventual exit from McLaren. The CRB revealed that Oscar had signed a 2-season contract with McLaren on the 4th of July. That's all the way back to the day after the British Grand Prix. Despite this contract being signed 2 months ago, both Andreas Seidel and Zach Brown have lied to the media, making statements on the 11th of July, reaffirming their loyalty to Ricciardo. Furthermore, from the Instagram statement made by Daniel, in which he stated that he was committed to McLaren until the end of next year, it is clear that Danny Ric too was lied to by the upper management of the McLaren F1 team. This incident has, without doubt, greatly tarnished the credibility of both Seidel and Brown, who were previously seen as very reliable figures in the paddock, and it has left Daniel in a desperate scramble to remain in the sport next year. Despite many questioning Oscar's decision to switch midfield teams, at the time Oscar began to look elsewhere, there was no guarantee that the Aussie would be racing in 2023 or even 2024 in Formula 1, as Fernando Alonso looked set to renew his contract with the team. Coming back to Alpine themselves, and from interviews on Saturday, in which Alpine team principal Otmar Zafnauer emphasised loyalty, it seems that the French team assumed a gentleman's agreement would come into play with Oscar Piastri, and that Alpine's nurturing of the young driver through the years would be rewarded with commitment in Formula 1. But onto the future of Alpine's second seat, Pierre Gasly is currently the main contender at the moment, with seemingly only Helmut Marko's stubborn nature in the way of that move. But under the surface, there are more personal issues to why Pierre might not be a viable option for the team. Esteban Ocon and Pierre Gasly used to be very close, as two French drivers born in the same year with the same dream of reaching F1. But a multitude of incidents in both karting and in Formula 1 itself, such as that opening lap crash between the two at their home Grand Prix in 2018, has soured their relationship. Subsequently, Esteban Ocon himself has favoured Mick Schumacher over his compatriot in the race to replace Alonso. If this occurs, then it seems that Daniel's best opportunity is now to settle with a seat with Haas, as I should hope that he has the wits to avoid the Red Bull family until the end of his career like the plague. Now, moving on to free practice, and Mercedes were looking particularly confident after their disappointing outing last weekend in Spa, with a 1-2 in the opening practice session, followed by a 3-5 in the afternoon's runnings. Both Lewis Hamilton and George Russell cited that Friday in Zandvoort was far better than that of last week, and a confident P2 from Russell in final practice meant that the Mercedes drivers were very much in the picture for pole position come qualifying day. Ferrari looked equally menacing in the first 3 hours of lap times in the weekend, as Charles Leclerc took the fastest time in the final 2 sessions, his teammate Carlos Sainz never too far behind either. Also to note coming into qualifying was the vast quantity of almost fatal incidents in the 3 sessions prior to the fight for pole. Zandvoort is a seaside circuit, so there are often very harsh and unpredictable gusts of wind which destabilise the already volatile F1 cars. For example, both Haas drivers took a trip across the gravel at turn 11, followed by Daniel Ricciardo, and both Sergio Perez and Yuki Tsunoda spun at turn 9, the latter of whom brought out the red flag. Tsunoda's teammate Pierre Gasly also had 2 close calls, at turn 7 and 10, both in FP3. And finally, there were also a number of hardware issues in free practice, with both McLarens, who have been looking very sharp, with Norris putting in 2 consecutive P4 times in FP1 and 2, missing small chunks of time thanks to mechanical issues, and Max Verstappen also came to a halt on the entry to turn 3 in FP1 with a gearbox issue, bringing out the red flag and silencing the frenzied Dutch crowd. Max Verstappen was looking uncharacteristically lacking in pace on Friday and Saturday morning, as he only managed a best of 3rd place in FP3. But now on to qualifying, and in Q1, Verstappen was top. The surprise package of the first session most certainly Yuki Tsunoda, who put his car 3rd in the final seconds, with Lance Stroll also making it into the Q2 with 7th. However, Valtteri Bottas was out of qualifying at the first stage for the 2nd week running, the first time this has occurred since the Finn's very first season in the sport, all the way back in 2013. Joining Bottas in an early shower was Kevin Magnussen, who has also not reached Q2 in the consecutive weeks for the first time this season. Daniel Ricciardo had his worst qualifying since the opening round in Bahrain in 17th, and Sebastian Vettel made it 6 Q1 exits in the last 7 races, thanks to a mistake in the final sector, which put an end to his qualifying chances. Nicholas Latifi finished at the back of the grid for the 3rd time in 4 races as well. Q2 next, and Carlos Sainz was fastest in a session disrupted by flares thrown onto the track by swiftly removed fans. However, on the other end of the spectrum, Pierre Gasly was in 11th, not having reached Q3 since Baku, followed by the Alpine pair, Frenchman first, marking the team's first double Q2 elimination since all the way back in Spain 2020. In 14th was Zhou Guanyu, and Alex Albon rounded out the top 15, his 6th Q2 appearance of the season. And finally for Q3, and it was Max Verstappen who secured an exceedingly unlikely pole position, thanks in large part to the efforts of his teammate Sergio Perez, who managed to spin on the entry to turn 14, scuppering the chances of both Lewis Hamilton and George Russell, both of whom who looked set to challenge for P1. Instead, it was 4th and 6th for the 2 Brits, with Ferrari taking 2nd and 3rd, as the 2 of them managed to put in a solid lap prior to Spingate. Lando Norris was the best of the rest, 10 places up on his teammate, taking his 4th Q3 finish in a row, whilst Mick Schumacher secured his best finish since Austria in 8th. Yuki Tsunoda broke his 2-week Q2 drought in 9th, and Lando Norris rounded out the top 10, a mechanical issue confining him to the pits and ruining his chances of capitalising on phenomenal form in both the free practice sessions and the first 2 sessions of quali. So after that, my driver of the qualifying is without a doubt Max Verstappen. Despite being aided by that spin from his teammate Checo, Max did recover from a desultory 3 practice sessions, which saw a mechanical failure as well as a botch set up by the team in FP2. This, once again, epitomises the composure of Max Verstappen. Even when the odds look stacked against him, the Dutchman always manages to pull through. Now for my team of qualifying, and it's Mercedes. So close, yet so far for the Silver Arrows. By no fault of their own, both Mercedes drivers were stripped of the chance to shoot for pole. As Lewis commented after the disappointing Saturday, it was perfect up until the final corner. And finally, for my struggle of the race, of qualifying, it's Daniel Ricciardo. Last season, after it was announced that Valtteri Bottas would not be driving for Mercedes in 2022, there was a huge weight lifted off the Finn's shoulders. He no longer had that constant pressure to outperform his teammate, 7-time world champion Lewis Hamilton, and he knew that he could take risks, as his actions had no consequence whatsoever. As a polar opposite to this example, Daniel Ricciardo's post-announcement season has got off to the worst possible start in qualifying especially, with 2 non-Q3 qualifying sessions, whilst his teammate Norris has made the top 10 on both occasions. From these last 2 race weekends, it is apparent that this lack of form was not down to a mental block, but instead down to either a lack of skill or a lack of adaptivity. And now on to Sunday's race, and it was inevitably Max Verstappen who took his 4th win in a row, making this his 10th on the season from 15 rounds, as well as his 2nd consecutive victory at his home circuit. Safe to say, no one was betting against him. The Dutchman led from the line, whilst eventual 2nd place finisher George Russell had less luck, falling behind Lando Norris in the opening stages, from his grid position of 6th. The last of the podium finishers, Charles Leclerc, pitted on lap 18, before Verstappen ditched his old softs a lap later, leaving Lewis Hamilton in the lead and George Russell in 2nd, the team's first time running 1-2 in a race all season. Verstappen struck back on lap 28, regaining 2nd place with a move around the outside of George Russell at turn 1. Hamilton pitted for the first time on laps 30, coming out ahead of Carlos Sainz in 5th, before his teammate went to box 2 laps later. Lewis had caught up to the back of 4th place Sergio Perez by lap 37, making a move at turn 1, but almost losing out directly afterwards as Sebastian Vettel, who had pitted on the same lap, came out onto the racetrack right into the path of the 7-time world champion. And it was not until turn 3 that Lewis managed to finally clear Seb, almost letting Checo sneak right back into the top 4. The Mexican soon fell foul of Lewis Hamilton's Mercedes teammate George Russell, who also went around the outside of Perez, this time on lap 39. On the 46th lap of the race, Leclerc pitted onto what had seemingly become the optimal race tyre, the hards, just after one of the most bemusing incidents in F1 history. On lap 44, Yuki Tsunoda, who had been running in the lower half of the midfield all race, pitted for a new set of tyres. After exiting the pits, Yuki claimed over the team radio that his tyres had been fitted incorrectly and proceeded to stop at turn 4. However, the Japanese driver was then asked by the pit wall to continue, and he complied, starting up his engine again. But only 2 laps later, Yuki pitted once more, this time seemingly having his seatbelt adjusted for 30 seconds by his pit crew before returning